He mocked me in front of his friends for not having a job. They didn't know I owned the company they all worked for, until I fired them. I stayed silent through another evening of their cruel jokes. Can't even land an entry-level position. My husband Marcus laughed, clinking glasses with his colleagues. The irony was delicious. I'd hired the firm that had recruited each of them. Tomorrow, that same firm would help me clean house. The crystal glass felt cool against my palm as I watched them from across our marble-floored living room. 5 men in tailored suits, all senior executives at Meridian Industries, all handpicked by me through layers of shell companies and discreet hiring firms. And Marcus, my husband of 8 years, their VP of operations, leading the chorus of mockery. Remember when she tried interviewing at Meridian? Marcus continued, loosening his Armani tie. God, I wish I could have seen that train wreck. If only he knew that interview had been my quarterly inspection of middle management, carefully orchestrated through my labyrinth of holding companies. I'd built Meridian Industries from the ground up 12 years ago, before I even met Marcus. The company had been my first love, my redemption, after watching my father's small business crumble under corporate raiders. At least she's persistent, chuckled Ryan from marketing. How many rejections this month, Marcus? Lost count, Marcus smirked, reaching for the 30-year-old whiskey. My whiskey. Everything in this house, the art on the walls, the imported furniture, even the Rolex on his wrist, all paid for by the company he thought had rejected me. I took another sip of water, maintaining my practiced mask of quiet humiliation. The same mask I'd worn when I first met Marcus at a charity gala. Back then, I'd already learned the hard way that success attracted parasites. 3 failed relationships with men who saw me as their ticket to luxury had taught me caution. So when I met Marcus, I decided to experiment. I presented myself as a struggling freelance consultant, driving a modest Honda Civic and living in a cramped studio apartment. Marcus had seemed different at first, supportive, even encouraging. You'll find your place, he'd said in those early days. Just keep trying, your persistence will pay off. But as soon as we married and he moved into what he thought was our house, the mask began to slip. Success changed him, or rather, revealed him. The supportive boyfriend became the condescending husband. The man who once praised my intelligence began dismissing my opinions. The partner who encouraged my career began sabotaging my confidence. Hey honey, Marcus called out now, his voice dripping with false sympathy that made my skin crawl. Maybe you should try the coffee shop down the street. I heard they're hiring baristas. You know, something more suited to your skill level. More laughter erupted around the room. I forced a weak smile, playing my role perfectly. Inside, I was reviewing the documentation my private investigators had compiled over the past year. The unofficial meetings with competitors where Marcus sold our strategies. The inflated expense reports that funded his gambling addiction. The small but steady leaks of company information that always seemed to benefit Marcus's personal stock portfolio. Each laugh, each joke, each moment of humiliation had been carefully recorded. Not just by me, but by the security cameras I'd had installed throughout our home. Every conversation, every cruel comment, every instance of his mask slipping when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I think I'll head upstairs, I said softly, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. Big day tomorrow, another interview. Don't wait up, sweetie, Marcus called after me, already turning back to his friends. We're celebrating Patterson's promotion, might be a late one. Patterson, my latest plant in senior management. A Harvard MBA with impeccable credentials and absolutely no loyalty to Marcus's inner circle. Tomorrow, he would be the one documenting their alcohol-loosened conversations, adding to the mountain of evidence we'd been gathering. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Ryan's voice carry from the living room. How does she even get these interviews? I mean, her resume must be a joke by now. Pure desperation, another voice added. Companies probably take pity interviews just to avoid discrimination lawsuits. Their laughter followed me up the stairs like a soundtrack to my rage. Each cruel word added fuel to the fire that had been burning in my chest for months. Soon, very soon, they would learn the true cost of their cruelty. In my private study, locked away from their drunken voices, I settled behind my desk. To Marcus, this room was just his wife's pathetic attempt at having a home office. He'd made jokes about my pretend business to his friends countless times. What he didn't know was that behind the innocuous bookshelf lay my real workspace. The hidden wall panel slid open silently, revealing my secure command center. 3 monitors sprang to life, displaying Meridian Industries' real-time operations across the globe. Server farms in Singapore, manufacturing plants in Germany, sales offices in 12 countries. A small empire built through years of careful strategy, brilliant acquisitions, and ironclad NDAs. My phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. A message from Alina Rodriguez, my most trusted executive and one of only 3 people who knew my true identity. Final documentation in place. Board members briefed on tomorrow's agenda. Security protocols activated. The stage is set. I smiled, thinking of the carefully orchestrated revelation to come. The board had always known me as Victoria Sterling, the reclusive founder who communicated through encrypted video calls and digital intermediaries. In 12 years of running the company, I had never appeared in person at a board meeting. Tomorrow, they would meet their CEO face-to-face for the first time, not as the mysterious figure behind the screen, but as Marcus's unemployable wife. My fingers traced the edge of the termination papers spread across my desk. Not just for Marcus, but for every member of his little drinking club. Ryan Henderson from marketing, with his history of sexual harassment complaints that had been quietly buried. David Kim from finance, whose creative accounting had been funding his cocaine habit. Bradley Walsh from operations, who'd been selling client information to competitors for 2 years. And Connor Mills from HR, who turned the hiring process into his personal playground for discrimination. Each document was backed by months of evidence, meticulously gathered and reviewed by our legal team. Harassment complaints from 17 different women, financial irregularities totaling over $3 million, security breaches that could have cost us our biggest clients, email chains that read like a manual for corporate malfeasance. The sound of breaking glass echoed from downstairs, followed by raucous laughter and Marcus's voice shouting, 5-second rule. They were using my grandmother's antique crystal as beer pong cups. Once, such careless disrespect for my family heirlooms would have brought me to tears. Now it just added another line item to my documentation: destruction of personal property during unauthorized company entertainment. I closed my eyes, letting the familiar hum of computers wash over me. The servers never slept, processing millions of transactions, managing supply chains that fed half the world's electronics market. Every circuit board in every smartphone, every processor in every laptop. Somewhere in the chain, Meridian Industries had touched it. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight, I savored the calm before the storm, remembering my father's words from his deathbed. Success isn't about who has the biggest voice in the room, Victoria. It's about who has the wisdom to wait, watch, and pick the perfect moment to act. The loudest person is usually the most insecure. The quiet ones, they're the ones you should fear. The perfect moment had finally arrived. Through the security monitors, I watched Marcus and his friends stumbling around my living room like frat boys at a kegger. Ryan was attempting to balance a wine bottle on his nose, while Connor took pictures for social media. Bradley had passed out on my Italian leather sofa, drooling on cushions that cost more than most people's monthly salary. David was rifling through my liquor cabinet, probably looking for something expensive to steal. I switched to the external cameras, watching their Ubers arrive. Each driver was one of my employees, working for the car service company I'd quietly acquired 6 months ago. Every conversation, every destination, every drunken confession would be recorded and cataloged. They thought they were so clever, using rideshares to avoid DUI charges. They had no idea they were riding in mobile surveillance units. As the last car disappeared into the night, I heard Marcus stumble up the stairs. I quickly closed the hidden panel and pretended to be reviewing job listings on my laptop. The irony wasn't lost on me. The CEO of a Fortune 500 company, pretending to search for entry-level positions while her husband crashed into furniture in the hallway. Still up, Marcus slurred, leaning against the doorframe. His tie was missing, his shirt was stained with whiskey, and he reeked of cigars and desperation. Just preparing for tomorrow's interview, I said softly, not looking up from my screen. He laughed, a harsh sound that made my skin crawl. Right, the interview, at that startup, right? What was it called again? TechFlow Solutions, I replied, remembering the fake company Alina had created for the charade. Complete with a website, LinkedIn profiles, and a legitimate business address. We'd thought of everything. Well, don't get your hopes up too high, Marcus said, stumbling toward the bathroom. I mean, after all these rejections, you might want to consider that maybe you're just not cut out for the corporate world. Some people are leaders and some people are, well, you know. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. You're probably right, I whispered. I know I'm right, he called from the bathroom. That's why I'm VP of operations at one of the most successful companies in the industry, and you're you. As I listened to him crash around the bathroom, knocking over bottles and cursing at his reflection, I pulled up tomorrow's schedule on my secure phone. 9:00 a.m., fake interview as Diana Martinez. 10:30 a.m., transform into Victoria Sterling. 11:00 a.m., board meeting to approve terminations. 11:30 a.m., security escorts Marcus and his friends from the building. 12:00 p.m., press conference announcing new leadership structure. By sunset, Marcus would know the truth. His unemployed wife wasn't just the CEO of Meridian Industries. She was the most powerful woman in the tech industry, worth more than his entire social circle combined. The woman he'd spent 8 years belittling and undermining was the same person who'd built an empire while he thought she was failing at basic job interviews. The thought brought a small smile to my lips as I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of tomorrow's sweet revelation. Morning arrived with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. My alarm buzzed at 5:30 a.m., 2 hours before Marcus would even think about stirring. I had work to do, a performance to prepare, and a company to save from the cancer that had been growing in its executive ranks. I moved through my morning routine like an actress preparing for the role of her lifetime. First, the armor of the underdog, a navy suit from Macy's that I'd bought specifically for this charade, complete with visible stitching and a polyester blend that would wrinkle by noon. Sensible flats from Target that pinched my feet and made me walk with slightly less confidence. A handbag from TJ Maxx that contained all the props I'd need for my performance. The makeup was crucial, just enough to look like I was trying too hard. Foundation slightly too light, lipstick slightly too bright, eyeshadow applied with the eager enthusiasm of someone who'd watched YouTube tutorials but lacked professional training. Every detail was calculated to reinforce the image of a woman desperately trying to impress, but falling just short of professional polish. By 6:15, I was in my Honda Civic, the car I'd driven to meet Marcus 8 years ago and had kept stored in a garage across town ever since. It started reluctantly, coughing like a smoker's lung before settling into an uneven idle, perfect for the desperate job seeker persona. The drive to Meridian Industries felt surreal. I'd made this journey thousands of times in my Tesla, my Porsche, my Mercedes, depending on my mood and the impression I wanted to make, but never in this cramped economy car that smelled like the vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. At 6:30 a.m. sharp, I entered through the service entrance, using the keycard that Alina had prepared for Diana Martinez, interview candidate. The security guard, Tony, barely glanced at me. I'd handpicked him myself 3 years ago, impressed by his attention to detail and discretion. Today, his job was to not notice the CEO walking past his desk in disguise. Alina met me in the basement security office, away from the morning rush of employees, arriving for another day of corporate warfare. She looked impeccable as always, her power suit tailored to perfection, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun that made her look like she could cut glass with her cheekbones. "Everything's in place," she murmured, handing me a visitor's badge with a practiced efficiency that spoke of months of planning. "The interview is scheduled for 9:00 a.m. with Thomas in HR. Marcus's team has their regular morning meeting at 8:30. Patterson will keep them occupied while ensuring their conversation is properly documented." The visitor's badge felt strange against my cheap blazer. Diana Martinez, interview candidate escort required. For 12 years, I'd moved through this building with absolute authority. Today, I would need permission to visit the bathroom. "Security protocols?" I asked, though I knew Alina had thought of everything. "All executive floors are locked down except for authorized personnel. Marcus and his team will be confined to the 15th floor conference room until 11 a.m. The board is assembling on 30-your floor. They think they're meeting to discuss quarterly projections." I smiled at the irony. In a way, they were. Marcus and his friends had certainly impacted our projections, just not in the way they'd intended. Media, I continued, running through my mental checklist. Standing by, the press release is ready to go out the moment you give the signal. Legal has confirmed all termination documents are ironclad. HR has the severance packages, well, the lack thereof, properly documented, and accounting has tracked every penny of their creative expenses. Alina pulled up a tablet showing real-time surveillance feeds from throughout the building. Executive parking garage, empty except for security. Lobby, normal morning traffic. 15th floor, Marcus's office light was on, which meant he'd actually made it in despite his hangover. Impressive, considering how much he'd consumed last night. One more thing, Alina said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Patterson found something interesting in Bradley's office last night. Hidden camera, pointed at the women's restroom across the hall. He's been recording for months. My blood ran cold. I'd known Bradley was a creep, but this crossed every line imaginable. Evidence. Secured, legal says it's enough to press criminal charges, not just termination. I felt a familiar rage building in my chest, the same fire that had sustained me through 8 years of humiliation and mockery. These weren't just incompetent executives, they were predators who turned my company into their personal hunting ground. Change of plans, I said, my voice taking on the steel that had built an empire. Add sexual harassment and invasion of privacy to Bradley's termination, and make sure the district attorney gets copies of everything. Alina nodded grimly. Already in progress. The FBI's cybercrime unit will be very interested in his extracurricular activities. I checked my reflection in the security monitor, making sure every detail of my disguise was perfect. The woman staring back looked exactly like what Marcus expected, desperate, slightly pathetic, trying too hard to be something she could never be. If only he knew. It's time, Alina said, glancing at her Rolex. Thomas will be expecting Diana Martinez in 15 minutes. I took a deep breath, centering myself for the performance of a lifetime. Wish me luck. You don't need luck, Alina replied with a predatory smile. You have something better, you have the truth. The elevator ride to the HR floor felt like ascending to a stage. At each floor, employees entered and exited, most looking right through me, just another hopeful candidate in a cheap suit. If they'd looked closer, they might have noticed that my cheap handbag was actually a limited edition piece I'd had specially distressed, or that my discount shoes were handcrafted Italian leather, deliberately scuffed to look worn. The attention to detail was everything. Marcus and his friends prided themselves on being able to spot quality, to separate the wheat from the chaff with a glance. Today, they would see exactly what they expected to see. A woman who shopped at all the wrong stores, who tried too hard, who didn't belong in their rarefied world. They would be absolutely right, of course. I didn't belong in their world. I had created a better one. The HR floor buzzed with the usual morning energy, coffee brewing, keyboards clicking, the gentle hum of a workplace that had no idea it was about to witness corporate history. I sat in the waiting area, deliberately arriving 30 minutes early to play the part of the overeager candidate. The magazines on the coffee table were issues of Harvard Business Review and Forbes, publications that had featured articles about Meridian Industries' mysterious CEO. I'd written 2 of those articles myself, under a pseudonym, carefully crafting the myth of Victoria Sterling as a reclusive genius who preferred to let her work speak for itself. Miss Martinez, Thomas appeared at exactly 8:45, 15 minutes before our scheduled appointment. I recognized him from his personnel file, 32 years old, MBA from a decent but not prestigious school, eager to please his superiors to a fault. Perfect for this charade. Oh, I said, jumping up with the nervous energy of someone who'd been rehearsing this moment for weeks. Am I early? I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't late, and traffic was lighter than I expected, and I know how important first impressions are. No problem at all, Thomas said with the practiced patience of someone who dealt with nervous candidates daily. I have a few minutes. Why don't we get started? He led me through the open office layout I'd designed 7 years ago, past workstations where dedicated employees were building their careers in a company they believed in. My company. Built with my vision, sustained by my leadership, protected by my careful cultivation of talent. So, Thomas said, settling into his chair in the small conference room, tell me about yourself. I launched into the carefully crafted story Alina and I had developed. Diana Martinez, freelance consultant specializing in process optimization, recently moved to the city when her longtime boyfriend, a fictional marketing executive named Jeff, had taken a position with a competitor. Struggling to break into the corporate world despite years of experience with small businesses. Every word was designed to trigger Marcus's prejudices. The girlfriend who'd followed her man to a new city. The consultant who'd never worked for a real company. The small business background that Marcus always dismissed as playing in the minor leagues. Through the glass walls, I could see the executives arriving for their morning meetings. Ryan strutted through the hallway like he owned the building, his designer suit impeccable despite last night's debauchery. Connor followed close behind, probably nursing a hangover but hiding it well. David moved with the careful precision of a man who'd had too much to drink but was desperately trying to appear sober. And then Marcus appeared, striding through the office with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. He nodded to several employees, clapped a junior executive on the shoulder, played the part of the beloved leader. The same performance I'd watched him give for years, never realizing it was exactly that, a performance. The skills assessment Thomas handed me was almost insulting in its simplicity. Basic Excel formulas that I'd mastered before I could drive. Simple database queries that any competent intern could handle. Financial projections so elementary they barely qualified as math. I deliberately made small mistakes, nothing too obvious, but enough to reinforce the impression of someone who was trying hard but falling just short of competence. A miscalculated percentage here, a formatting error there, the kind of mistakes that would make Marcus and his friends exchange knowing glances. Through the glass, I could see Marcus passing by the conference room. He did a double take when he spotted me, his eyes widening in recognition before narrowing in what looked like embarrassment. He quickly pulled out his phone, typing furiously. Within 30 seconds, 3 phones buzzed simultaneously in the conference room next door. Thomas glanced at his phone, then at me, then back at his phone. His professional demeanor flickered for just a moment, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like pity mixed with second-hand embarrassment. Well, he said, reviewing my intentionally flawed work with the tone of a doctor delivering bad news, this is interesting. Let's move on to the panel interview, shall we? The panel interview was held in a conference room that overlooked the city, a view I usually enjoyed from my private office 24 floors above. 3 middle managers waited inside, all wearing expressions I'd seen countless times before. The look of predators who'd spotted wounded prey. I recognized each face from their personnel files, knew their salaries, their performance reviews, their little secrets. The gambling debts, the affairs, the corner cutting that had saved them time but cost the company quality. In any other circumstance, at least 2 of them would have been terminated by now. But they were Marcus's people, protected by his patronage and their willingness to laugh at his jokes. Today, that protection would evaporate like morning dew in sunlight. So, Miss Martinez, began the first interviewer, Janet Walsh, Bradley's wife and a nepotism hire if I'd ever seen one. I see you've been between positions for some time. The phrasing was deliberately cruel, designed to highlight my apparent failure rather than simply ask about my employment history. I'd seen this tactic used against dozens of qualified candidates, always delivered with a smile that never reached the eyes. Yes, I replied softly, adding a slight tremor to my voice that suggested this was a sensitive subject. It's been challenging in this market. A lot of companies seem to want someone with corporate experience, but it's hard to get corporate experience without someone giving you a chance. The second interviewer, Mark Stevens from Business Development, barely looked up from his phone as he asked, "And what makes you think you're qualified for a position at Meridian Industries?" Through the glass walls, I could see Marcus hovering nearby, clearly eavesdropping on his wife's humiliation. His face wore the expression of someone watching a car accident, horrified but unable to look away. Behind him, Ryan and Connor were trying unsuccessfully to hide their amusement. I launched into my carefully prepared response about bringing fresh perspectives and eagerness to learn. All the buzzwords that desperate candidates used when they had nothing else to offer. The interviewer's attention drifted as I spoke, checking their phones, exchanging glances, making notes that probably had nothing to do with my qualifications. Tell me about a time when you had to overcome a significant challenge, Janet said, leaning back in her chair with the bored expression of someone going through the motions. I told them about the fictional consulting project where I'd helped a family restaurant optimize their supply chain, how I'd spent weeks analyzing their purchasing patterns, negotiating better deals with vendors, streamlining their inventory management, how I'd increased their profit margins by 30% over 6 months. It was actually a real project, one I'd overseen at Meridian 3 years ago, but scaled down and simplified to sound appropriately small time. The irony was delicious. I was describing work that had saved Meridian Industries over $2 million, presenting it as a minor success with a mom-and-pop operation. That's nice, Mark said dismissively. But this is a Fortune 500 company. The scale of operations is quite different from a family restaurant. Of course, I agreed quickly, adding just the right note of deference to my voice. I understand that completely. I know I have a lot to learn about enterprise-level operations, but I'm eager to grow and contribute however I can. The third interviewer, Patricia Cole from Human Resources, finally spoke up. What would you say is your biggest weakness? It was the most cliched interview question in existence, the kind that revealed more about the interviewer than the candidate. I gave them the classic non-answer. I sometimes work too hard and have trouble delegating. Patricia actually rolled her eyes. Through the glass, Marcus was now openly grinning, gesturing animatedly to his friends as he narrated what was presumably my humiliation. I could see Ryan laughing, Connor shaking his head in what looked like sympathetic embarrassment, David making exaggerated gestures that probably involved mocking my appearance. "Do you have any questions for us?" Janet asked, clearly ready to end the charade. "Just one," I said, leaning forward with what I hoped looked like earnest enthusiasm. "What would success look like in this role? What would I need to accomplish in my first year to exceed your expectations?" It was actually a good question, the kind that demonstrated strategic thinking and goal orientation. But coming from Diana Martinez in her discount suit, it sounded desperate and naive. "Well," Mark said, checking his watch, "I think we've covered everything we need to. Thank you for your time, Miss Martinez. We'll be in touch." The dismissal was brutal in its finality. No timeline for follow-up, no next steps, no polite fiction about having other candidates to interview. Just the corporate equivalent of "don't call us, we'll call you." As I gathered my props, the notebook where I'd pretended to take notes, the portfolio containing fake work samples, the hopeful smile that was starting to hurt my face, I caught one last glimpse through the glass wall. Marcus was walking away with his friends, their laughter echoing down the hallway like a funeral dirge for Diana Martinez's fictional career aspirations. In a few hours, that laughter would take on a very different tone. Thomas escorted me to the elevator with the professional courtesy of an undertaker. "Thank you again for coming in," he said. "We'll be reviewing all our candidates and we'll let you know our decision soon." As the elevator doors closed, I allowed myself one moment of genuine emotion. Not sadness for Diana Martinez, she had never existed anyway, but rage for every real candidate who had endured this kind of humiliation, every qualified woman who had been dismissed because she didn't fit their narrow definition of executive potential. The elevator descended past floors filled with people who deserved better leadership than Marcus and his cronies could provide, past departments that would flourish once the toxic influence was removed, past the future I was about to build from the ashes of their arrogance. On the ground floor, I walked through the lobby one last time as Diana Martinez. In 30 minutes, I would return as Victoria Sterling, and this building would never be the same again. The transformation was about to begin. The executive restroom on the 29th floor had been designed as my private sanctuary, though only Alina and the building's architect knew its true purpose. Hidden behind what appeared to be a standard corporate washroom was a space that would have made Fortune 500 CEOs weep with envy. Alina was waiting with the garment bag, her expression a mixture of anticipation and predatory satisfaction. "How was the interview?" she asked, though my expression probably told her everything she needed to know. "Exactly as expected," I replied, already shedding the costume of failure. The polyester blazer hit the marble floor with a sound like a dead thing falling. The pinching shoes followed, kicked into the corner with more force than necessary. They performed their roles perfectly. Inside the garment bag was my real armor. A Chanel suit in midnight blue that had been tailored by the same craftsman who dressed European royalty. The fabric whispered against my skin as I slipped it on, each seam precisely engineered to project power and control. Laubautin heels that added 3 inches to my height and transformed my walk into a statement of intent. But the most important piece was the security badge, the one that would give Victoria Sterling access to every floor, every office, every secret in the building. After 12 years of hiding behind intermediaries and encrypted communications, I was finally ready to step into the light. Elena held up a mirror as I transformed from desperate job seeker to corporate titan. The makeup that had looked garish under fluorescent interview lights now appeared subtle and professional under the executive floor's carefully calibrated lighting. My hair, released from its nervous ponytail, fell in perfectly styled waves that had cost more than Diana Martinez's entire outfit. "The board is assembled," Elena reported, checking her tablet. "Marcus and his team are still in their morning meeting, completely unaware that their world is about to implode. Security teams are in position on every floor. Legal has confirmed all documentation is in order, and the FBI is standing by to arrest Bradley the moment we give them the signal." I slipped on the pearl necklace that had been my mother's, feeling its weight settle against my collarbone like a shield. She had worn it to every important business meeting, every negotiation that had built our family's modest fortune before my father's company was destroyed by men exactly like Marcus. "Are you ready?" Elena asked, though we both knew the question was rhetorical. I had been preparing for this moment for 8 years. The private elevator to the 30th floor required 2 keycards and a biometric scan. As the sensors verified my identity, I felt the last vestiges of Diana Martinez's false persona fall away. The woman who stepped into that elevator was Victoria Sterling, founder and CEO of Meridian Industries, architect of a technology empire worth $12 billion. The elevator rose smoothly, each floor marker bringing me closer to the reckoning I'd orchestrated with surgical precision. At floor 15, I thought of Marcus and his friends, still laughing about his wife's humiliation. At floor 20, I thought of all the qualified candidates they'd rejected based on prejudice and cruelty. At floor 25, I thought of the employees who deserved better leadership. And at floor 30, I thought of justice. The elevator opened directly into my private office, a space Marcus had never seen, had never even imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I'd helped build through strategic investments and partnerships. The furnishings were museum-quality pieces that whispered rather than shouted their expense. Awards and recognitions lined the walls, achievements credited to the phantom CEO who had never appeared in public. Elena followed me out, immediately activating the wall-mounted displays that would show real-time surveillance feeds from throughout the building. "Showtime," she murmured. On the screens, I could see Marcus's team still engaged in their morning meeting, probably planning their next round of discrimination and harassment. They looked so confident, so secure in their little kingdom. In 15 minutes, their kingdom would be revealed as the house of cards it had always been. But first, I had a board to address. The boardroom adjoined my office through a soundproof door that had been installed for maximum dramatic effect. Beyond that door waited 12 of the most powerful business leaders in the industry, men and women who had guided Meridian Industries through its meteoric rise while never meeting their mysterious CEO in person. I paused at the door, my hand on the brushed steel handle. After today, there would be no going back to the shadows, no more hiding behind intermediaries and digital communications. Victoria Sterling would finally step into the light, and with her would come the reckoning that Marcus and his friends had earned through years of cruelty and incompetence. Through the surveillance monitors, I could see them growing restless in the boardroom, checking their watches and phones, wondering why their punctual CEO was running late. Several were reviewing the quarterly reports that showed record profits despite the executive team's best efforts to sabotage company culture. One final check in the mirror confirmed that every detail was perfect. The woman looking back was someone who had built an empire, who had outmaneuvered competitors and regulators and hostile takeover attempts. Someone who had survived 8 years of psychological warfare while maintaining a facade of vulnerability. Someone who was about to remind the world why quiet people are the most dangerous. I opened the door and stepped into the boardroom. The conversation died instantly as I entered. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions that ranged from confusion to recognition to dawning amazement. After years of encrypted video calls and digital intermediaries, Victoria Sterling was finally standing before them in flesh and blood. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, taking my place at the head of the table with the confidence of someone who had earned her position through 12 years of flawless leadership. "Thank you for accommodating this emergency session." Board Chair Margaret Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was the first to find her voice. "Victoria, is it really, after all these years?" "It's me," I confirmed, settling into the chair that had been reserved for a ghost for over a decade. "And I apologize for the theatrical nature of this revelation, but circumstances have forced my hand." I activated the room's presentation system with a gesture Alina had programmed to respond to my biometrics. The screens around the room came to life, displaying the Meridian Industries logo before transitioning to a slide that simply read, "Executive Misconduct, a Comprehensive Review." The board members exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from surprise to concern. These were seasoned executives who had navigated corporate crises before, but the combination of my dramatic appearance and the ominous presentation title had clearly put them on high alert. "As you know," I began, "Meridian Industries has achieved unprecedented growth and profitability over the past 12 years. Our employee satisfaction ratings, however, tell a different story, particularly in departments overseen by certain members of our executive team." The first slide showed employee satisfaction scores broken down by department. Marketing, finance, operations, and human resources, all departments controlled by Marcus and his friends, showed satisfaction ratings nearly 40% lower than the company average. "Initially, I attributed this disparity to the natural challenges of rapid growth," I continued, "but a comprehensive investigation has revealed a more disturbing pattern." The presentation shifted to a series of charts showing harassment complaints, discriminatory hiring practices, and suspicious financial activities. Each graph told a story of systemic abuse that had been hidden beneath surface-level success metrics. Robert Martinez, our longest-serving board member, leaned forward with a frown. "Victoria, these numbers are concerning, but surely you're not suggesting that our entire executive team is involved in misconduct." "Not the entire team," I replied, advancing to the next slide. "Just the 5 members who have spent the past several years turning their departments into personal fiefdoms, where harassment, discrimination, and fraud are not only tolerated but encouraged." The screen now displayed headshots of Marcus, Ryan, Connor, David, and Bradley, along with a summary of their crimes: fraud, embezzlement, harassment, insider trading, predation. Each accusation backed by documented evidence that had been meticulously gathered, time-stamped, and corroborated. Gasps rippled through the room. A few board members leaned forward, their eyes narrowing in disbelief. Others exchanged sharp whispers. Marcus's name on that list was the detonator. They all knew what this meant for the company's future, for their own reputations, for the empire we had built. I continued, my voice calm, measured, precise, the voice of someone who had waited years to deliver this truth. "Over the past 12 months, I authorized a covert internal investigation into these individuals. What we found was not only unethical, it was criminal. Evidence of corporate espionage, falsified reports, sexual misconduct, and financial theft. Enough to dismantle this company from within if left unchecked." The screens shifted to show recorded footage. Marcus joking about milking the company perks while signing off bloated expense reports. Bradley's hidden camera feeds, blurred for discretion but unmistakable in implication. Ryan's drunken brag about shutting up female employees who complained, David's secret off-book accounts, Connor's emails dripping with discriminatory hiring remarks. By the time the reel ended, silence had descended over the boardroom like a thundercloud. Finally, Margaret Chen spoke, her voice trembling with outrage. "And Marcus, your husband, he's been at the center of this." "Yes," I said simply. "He believed me weak, powerless, disposable. What he didn't know is that while he was mocking his wife for being unemployed, I was documenting every crime he and his friends committed under my roof, in my company, against my people." I let the silence linger, let the weight of every word sink in. Then, with deliberate calm, I placed 5 envelopes on the table, sliding them forward like a dealer revealing her hand. "Here are their termination papers, effective immediately. Legal has confirmed there is no severance due to gross misconduct. Security is waiting outside this room for your approval to proceed. The FBI is already en route for Bradley." The board members erupted into overlapping questions, concerns, exclamations. What about investor confidence? Will the press? Can we recover from this scandal? I raised a hand and the room stilled. The market respects strength, not weakness. By acting decisively, by showing that Meridian Industries cleans its own house, we will gain trust, not lose it. Transparency is our shield, justice is our weapon. Margaret studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You've hidden in the shadows for 12 years, Victoria. Today, you've proven why you were right to. But now you must step into the light." I smiled faintly. That was always the plan. She reached for the stack of termination papers, her voice steady with resolve. "Then let's clean house." At exactly 11:00 a.m., security entered the 15th floor conference room. Marcus and his cronies were still laughing over their morning coffee, completely oblivious. When the head of security announced they were relieved of duty and escorted out, confusion turned to outrage. Ryan barked about contracts. Connor demanded to see HR. David swore it was a mistake. Bradley tried to bolt but was intercepted by 2 FBI agents in suits. And Marcus looked around desperately, as though his wife would come rushing in to rescue him from this humiliation. Instead, when the elevator doors opened onto the 30th floor, it was me he saw. Not Diana Martinez in her polyester suit. Not the submissive, humiliated wife. But Victoria Sterling, Chanel armor gleaming, heels striking against the marble, eyes locked on his. The color drained from his face. No, this isn't. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said coldly, stepping closer until he could see the steel in my gaze. "The woman you mocked, the wife you belittled, the ghost you thought was failing interviews. I am Victoria Sterling, CEO of Meridian Industries, and you are nothing." Gasps from employees watching nearby. Cameras from the press already flashing as the story unfolded in real time. Marcus stumbled back, stammering, You can't. Watch me." With a nod to security, I turned away. Marcus's protests echoed down the hallway as they dragged him toward the exit, his friends flailing behind him. Bradley, handcuffed, was read his rights as cameras captured every second. The press conference began moments later. I stood before a wall of microphones, the city skyline behind me, and spoke the words I had waited 8 years to say. Meridian Industries was built on integrity, innovation, and respect. Those values have been betrayed by members of our own leadership. Today, that ends. Effective immediately, the executives responsible have been terminated. Criminal charges are being filed, and this company will emerge stronger, cleaner, and more just than ever before. Because no one, not even those closest to me, stands above the truth. The room erupted with questions, flashes, voices calling my name. But through it all, I stood tall, every inch the leader my father had raised me to be. By sunset, the world knew the truth. Headlines blazed across every outlet. Mysterious CEO revealed, Victoria Sterling exposes corrupt executives in dramatic boardroom coup. Marcus and his friends were disgraced, their names forever tied to scandal. Bradley faced prison, the rest financial ruin. As for me, I walked back into the home Marcus had once claimed as his own. No longer silent, no longer masked. The house was quiet, peaceful. I poured myself a glass of the 30-year-old whiskey Marcus had flaunted the night before, holding it up to the city lights outside. To the perfect masquerade, I whispered. And for the first time in years, I drank not in silence but in victory.